The Japanese Army's comfort women system was a planned sex-slave allocation system of the Japanese government dating from before the Second World War. Comfort women is the general name given by Japan to women providing sexual services to the Japanese Army. It was a blatant abuse of women's rights. Nowadays in the English language, the term comfort women is more and more employed as a euphemism for the more explicitly evil sex slaves. In January 1932 in Shanghai, the Japanese Army launched an offensive against the Chinese Army. It was around that time that comfort stations and comfort women, provided to Japanese soldiers for sexual services, started to appear in Shanghai. In July 1937, Japan launched its full-scale war of aggression against China and extended the comfort women system to all Chinese territory occupied by the Japanese Army. After the outbreak of the Pacific War, the Japanese Army's comfort stations spread to its occupied territories in Southeast Asia. It was not until the Japanese surrender that this military sex-slave system ended. China's Central Archives and other archives in the provinces of Liaoning, Jilin and Heilongjiang, as well as the cities of Shanghai and Nanjing, still preserve files on these comfort women. These archives not only include Japanese war archives and archives of the puppet regime fostered by Japan on occupied territory, they also include archives on the post-war repossession of occupied assets by the Chinese government, post-war damage investigations, and also trials of Japanese war criminals. These archives clearly reveal the historical facts about how the Japanese Army at the time enslaved comfort women and opened comfort stations. It is a thought-provoking historical memory. In Japanese military police records and Central Bank of Manchukuo records held in the Jilin Provincial Archives, we principally find the following references to comfort women. Data on the condition of comfort stations facilities in all territory occupied by the Japanese Army. Statistics on proportional allocation of comfort women to soldiers of the Japanese Army. Statistics on the Japanese Army user count for comfort women in comfort stations. Financial records for public funds used by the Japanese Army in order to pay the costs associated with comfort women. Investigation records of the Japanese military police on the situation of its soldiers in comfort stations in China, as well as what is now Java in Indonesia. In the Shanghai International Settlements Police Force archives, held in the Shanghai Municipal Archives, we find references to investigations and rulings on pro-Japanese militants luring and trafficking Chinese women to become comfort women in Japanese Army-owned comfort stations, dated April 1938. In the Japanese puppet regime archives in China, we find reports, application forms, sketch maps, business licenses, and statistical tables for the opening of comfort stations. In the People's Republic of China's investigation and management of Japanese war criminals archives from the 1950s, kept in the Central Archives, we find a considerable number of written and oral confessions from Japanese war criminals concerning the Japanese Army's comfort stations, as well as the forcing of Chinese, Korean, Indonesian, and other countries' women to become comfort women. Examples include written confession of the Lieutenant General and Division Head of the Japanese Army's 117th Division, Suzuki Kaiku. He set up a comfort station in Chao County of Anhui Province and kidnapped 20 Chinese and Korean women to become comfort women. In 1945, he ordered the setting up of comfort stations in occupied territories and kidnapped about 60 Chinese and Korean women to become comfort women. These archives prove that these women were forced to become sex slaves by the Japanese Army. It was in no way voluntary. In July 2013, Chinese researchers visited Japan in order to conduct face-to-face interviews with 8 Japanese war criminals freed by China in 1956. These 8 war criminals narrated their criminal behavior at the time in China. One of these war criminals, Ibato Tsuyoshi, said during the Japanese invasion of the Shandong Peninsula in China,
それは捕虜の中の1名の女性がある下士官の慰安婦にされていた。それが錯覚症の駐在が長くなって食べ物に若干苦しむようになった時に彼はその女性を殺害しその肉を食べ自分で食べたばかりではなく中隊に今日は大隊本部から肉が上がったからとごまかしてそれを中隊の全兵隊に食べさせたという噂を聞きました。
According to these archives, the Japanese Army set up comfort stations in occupied Chinese territory, namely northeast, north, central, east, and south China. This shows the large territorial scope in which the comfort women system of the Japanese Army was implemented. Comfort women were not only Chinese women. They were also Korean women, as well as women from Java, Ambon, and other regions of the former East India, at the time a Dutch colony, today's Indonesia. This reveals the international nature of the comfort women issue. On the 4th of August 1993, the then Defense Secretary of the Japanese Government Cabinet, Kono Yohei, revealed, on behalf of the Japanese government, the investigation results on the comfort women, Japanese Army sex slaves, issue, now known as the Kono Apology, expressing sincere apologies and introspection.
深く傷つけた問題で旧日本軍が直接あるいは間接にこれに関与し軍の要請を受けた業者が主としてこれに当たったがその場合も還元強圧によると本人たちの意思に反して集められた事例が数多くあり
In June 1993, the United Nations World Conference on Human Rights passed the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, regarding the Japanese Army's comfort women issue as wartime slavery against women, which should be condemned. In 1996, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights report showed that the comfort women system was a World War II system in which the Japanese government forced women in occupied countries to become sex slaves of the Japanese Army, which the Japanese government should apologize for. On July 30th, 2007, the United States House of Representatives passed Bill No. 121, which condemned Japan for forcing Asian women to become the comfort women of the Japanese Army during World War II. From November to December 2007, the Dutch Parliament, the Canadian House of Commons, and the European Parliament successively